I want to appreciate Penny and the Maryland State Department of Ed for having us here today. As Penny mentioned, I'm here with two of my colleagues, Amy Evan and Carol Cohen, just a wealth of experience that they kind of bring to the session today that we're really hoping to share with you all as you continue to think about your plans for this year with your schools and how to improve academic achievement for all your kiddos. A little bit more about me. That it seemed as I was listening to Penny that my introduction was a bit of a word soup. Some real practical stuff about me in my background. Prior to coming to WestEd, I spent 10 years working as the Chief Financial Officer in large urban systems in California, places like Oakland, Stockton, and San Jose. Working with schools that were working with kids that were underserved and needed a lot of support in order to be successful in our system. So I'm really happy to kind of be here in Maryland, having seen those experiences in California and also working with other states across the country. But before we dive in, I want to actually get you guys to talk a little bit about connecting the work that you were doing this morning and setting you up for this afternoon. So I want you to take a few minutes and in a moment turn to your elbow partner, either to your left or right, and I'm happy to come out and serve as your partner if there is nobody to your left or right. And I want you to kind of discuss this prompt. So based on the data that you analyzed this morning, what's the desired state for your school? And you can pick either for this school year, next school year, or the year after. And specifically, I want you to hone in on students. So what is it that you want students to be experiencing differently, learning differently in this school year, next school year, or the year after? Okay? So go ahead and turn to your elbow partner, take 3 minutes to discuss, and then we'll come back together. A lot of what we're talking about this afternoon may not appear to be things that you can change, but when it comes to thinking about resources, the way you organize people and their time, the way they interact, those are real structural changes that you are making in a school. And we're going to offer some tools and ability and ways for you guys to think about this afternoon. Okay, so let's dive in. I want to talk a bit about session objectives. I'm a mover, so you might see me. So for today, around session objectives, first and foremost, to really think creatively and flexibly about resources. And not just about money, but in particular thinking about the adults that you work with in your schools, how they spend their time, their expertise, their roles and responsibilities, and how that supports your school improvement efforts in your specific setting. Second, that we want to ensure that there's an equity of outcome that drives resource allocation. There's these conceptions that we have in K-12 education that we, quote, achieve equity by ensuring that more resources get to kids of need. And research shows that if we put more dollars towards kids that have higher needs, you generally get better outcomes. But there is a gap to be closed between putting more resources into those schools or systems that have higher degrees of need with those students, and then implementing that on a day-to-day basis. And as principals and coaches and central office staff, you are the ones that are helping to close that gap. And third, that we establish some operational structures that kind of undergird the propulsion from a current state to a desired state. So again, we're going to offer some tools, some frames to think about this work in your setting that would allow you to close that gap. And in the room today, there's a couple of different sets of people, and I just want to call out explicitly some of those roles and responsibilities as you think about this session content. So first and foremost, we have principals that are from schools that whose students are not doing as well academically as others in the state of Maryland. And you are at the center. You are at the heart of this conversation. You are helping, in some ways, at the eye of the hurricane to make this change happen in your schools. And a lot of the content that you're going to hear today is helping you to shift some of that mindset, to set you up to have conversations with other leaders in your school and in your community as you think about these changes. We also have district coaches for the principals in the room, and I'd ask you to be thinking about the things today and how you can continue to reinforce when you go back to your districts and back to your schools with those school principals, how you can continue to reinforce that. Because everyone in this room knows And as a former district administrator myself, when you leave this room, there's 100 things that are waiting outside of that door for you. So how is it that you can leverage the coach from the district, and even potentially from the state, as a means to help keep you organized, both mentally and in terms of your list, to continue moving towards those goals that you had started to look at earlier today? And then the fourth group that we have in the room are a lot of central office administrators, and that's kind of my crew. That's how I have experienced schooling in the United States as a central office administrator. And I'd really encourage the folks from central office to think about what is it that's being presented today that you can take back to your district setting and help schools implement. I used to say to my staff all the time when I was in Oakland Unified, the only reason that our central office exists is because we have 75 schools that we have to serve. The only reason we have an office with staff and people that we compensate to process the budget, to run accounting, to run payroll, is because schools exist and there are adults that are working with those kids on a daily basis. So for our central admin in the room, pushing you to think about what is it that you can take away from today, particularly on the business and operations side, that allows you to support your schools that are in the room as they move forward in solidifying their plan this year and in the subsequent two. So a couple of things. I already mentioned one thing about the kind of current research here, that the way resources are used helps to determine how well students learn. We know a bit that as additional resources are pushed to more underserved populations, we start to see increases in student achievement. The most recent research that's come out around this is coming from states like California and Florida and North Carolina and Massachusetts. And as I mentioned before, better understanding how they use those resources on a day-to-day basis, how adults spend their time with children, how they spend time together, increasing their professional learning, are all things that we need to uncover a little bit more to better inform practice as you are with your other staff in your schools. And we also know that a key component of implementing a plan is determining which set of adequate resources are available to support the implementation of the plan. One of the best examples I have is when I was working in Stockton. I had a principal come to me and they had worked with their leadership team to develop a pretty aggressive plan, I think very similar to what we heard earlier around early learning, that she wanted to shift a bunch of resources from her upper elementary into her lower elementary because she was seeing a significant challenge with kids that were coming into the school were not necessarily prepared. And she wanted to push instructional coach resources, professional development resources. I was like, this is a great plan. How are you going to fund it? And she's like, looking at me as the CFO, well, I was hoping you could tell me that. So you have to consider, and while that exchange is important, and we worked through the budget process to change Title I allocations and some of the other state allocations when I was there, you have to be really aware as a principal that as you're constructing this plan, where are you going to get the resources to do this work? And I know sometimes in K-12 education we make it's exceedingly difficult because we put so many rules or regulations around federal resources or state resources. But in part, that's why the central office is there, is to help you navigate those waters. So keeping in mind what is the end that you want for kids and what are the set of strategies that you think are going to help you get there, there are others that are around you that are supporting you, coaches, central office personnel. They're going to help you to identify those resources to allow you to get there. But that's a necessity. You have to be able to identify those resources that go along with the strategy that you're putting in place. So when we think about the kind of ways that we can leverage business and operations to drive school improvement, there's primarily 4 categories that we build. The first and foremost is really around planning. We'll spend a fair amount of the time that I have kind of introducing this on that first bucket around planning. We're going to do some activities a little bit later this afternoon that are emphasizing the budgeting and in particular budget trade-offs. We will never have enough money in K-12 education. Never. And so the reality of that is that we have to make choices, sometimes really hard choices about where we put our dollars, And we have to get better at understanding when we make those choices, what are the things that we're getting for that? What are the types of increased professional learning that adults are walking away with? What are the determinant and better outcomes that students are getting as a result of that? And the two other buckets that I mentioned earlier was really around talent management and time. So thinking about how you're recruiting, selecting, and developing your staff to meet those improvement needs. Is the person that's on your bus in the right seat? And also thinking about how people spend their time, how they spend it with students, how they spend it with others, and how that's aggregated over time over the course of the year to reach an outcome. Most people are familiar with this notion of both equality and equity. And I offer this just as a reminder. I know that you've kind of seeped yourself in a lot of this already, but I think this is certainly a deep reminder for me about just the dramatic set of different needs that exist in our schools, and certainly across school districts, in thinking about making sure that the resources that we're providing for the different types of students truly are there to meet their need. And that can be hard in a school setting of when you're dealing with 400 or 500 or 600 kids. That's difficult, but how might we talk with our teachers, with our grade level leads, to create systems and set up ways in which they can identify what those needs are and then respond in the moment? And in some ways, I'll offer that there are real resource structures that you should be changing in your schools when you think about your special ed population or English learner population. But these kinds of things can also be really small. It could be the way that a teacher engages a kid before they walk in the classroom. It could be understanding where that student is coming from and how they're walking into school during the day. Like, do they have the mindset to be ready to learn when they sit down and begin to learn? So thinking about this both at scale, in the structure of your school, but also in those small opportunities, that engagement between an adult and a child in the school itself, I think is a very powerful way to think about how we're creating equity and equitable opportunities and outcomes for all of our kids in our schools. So a reminder that back in July you took a couple of days. This is the framework, the kind of 4 domains of rapid school improvement to discuss thinking about kind of your continuous improvement cycle. There's 4 domains, but when we think about this in the context of the rapid school improvement, you've got defining your problem of practice, selecting evidence-based solutions, implementing that plan, and then adjusting, continuing, or stopping that solution. And we're at the beginning stage of defining that problem of practice and beginning to think about some of those evidence-based solutions. And I know you're kind of in a little bit of limbo this year where you're implementing some of this and putting together the rest of your plan, but generally when we think about this cycle, that's kind of where we are at this stage of the game. Okay, who in the room, by show of hand, is familiar with Simon Sinek's why? Hands high. Okay, thank you. So Simon Sinek, he primarily works in the business world, but he's got this powerful notion of thinking about making sure you know what your why is. So his observation in working with organizations, both businesses, nonprofits, governmental organizations, is that they often start with the what. So in our context, we would say something like, the what is, we need a certain number of teachers to be in front of a classroom with a certain number of kids based on their need, right? And then we would say, well, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to set salary schedules, and we're going to make sure that teachers are hired to be in front of those kids. And then the last thing we say is, well, the reason that that's important is because, well, we need kids to learn, right? And the best way to potentially do that is to have a teacher in front of them to do that. And what his hypothesis is that you actually need to invert it. You need to start with the why. So thinking about why is it that any of you, or even myself, are in this field, are in this sector, right? We're here for kids. And in particular, you guys are working in environments that are exceedingly difficult with those kids. So you have some lens through which you look at the world that says these are the students that have those needs. The reason I worked in systems like Oakland and Stockton and San Jose is I wanted to dedicate that portion of my career to helping those that were less advantaged and doing everything in my expertise and power to make sure resources were getting to them in a way that was effective. So what Sinek says is you got to start with the why. So as leaders, starting with the why in front of your leadership teams, in front of your communities, that then allows them to hook the rationale for why you're doing it, that then circles to the what and the how. So I want to share a video from Sinek with you, what he calls the celery test. It is a way to test the why. So I want to give you a couple of minutes with him.
Now it's time to put your why into action. Discovering your why is just the beginning. In order to enjoy all the benefits of having a clearly articulated why, you'll need to have the courage and discipline to use it. Like Thomas Edison said, vision without execution is hallucination. There is an ideal order for implementing your why, though sometimes reality does get in the way, and it all starts with you. Our natural tendency is to start with the tangible. We define our value by what we do, so it takes practice to start with why. Like riding a bicycle, at first we're unsure, unsteady. We're in our heads thinking about all the things we need to do, pedal fast, keep enough speed so we don't fall over. We have to really concentrate. We may even fall over, even scrape our knees, but we get back on the bike and try again, and eventually it becomes natural. Starting with why is no different. At first, it feels awkward. It may not even work, but with practice, it will become so natural that you won't even be able to imagine a time when you couldn't do it, just like riding a bicycle. In time, your why will act as a filter for many of the decisions and choices you make. It becomes a tool to help you find a job or seize an opportunity in which you're more likely to succeed. It removes a lot of the guessing. Here's a metaphor to show you what I mean. It's called the celery test. We're constantly asking people for their advice on what to do or how to do it. It's like going to a dinner party and somebody says, "Do you know what you need? You need M&Ms. We've done so well with M&Ms, you've got to use M&Ms." Somebody else says to us, "Rice milk. In this economy, you have to use rice milk." Someone else says to us, "Kit Kats. You have to use Kit Kats." And somebody else says to you, "It's all about celery." We go to the supermarket with all this good advice from all these smart people with brilliant case studies, and we buy everything. We buy Kit Kats and M&Ms, celery and rice milk. There's a lot of time we spend at the supermarket and a lot of money we spend at the supermarket. And when we get to the checkout lane, we're standing there with all these products in our hands, and no one can see what we believe, because we bought everything. But let's imagine we know our why. Let's imagine our why is to always be healthy and only do things that protect the health of our bodies. Now, which products do we buy? Given all the same advice from all the same smart people, this time we only buy celery and we only buy rice milk. They're the only two that make sense. We spend less time and less money at the supermarket. And when we're standing there in line with only celery and only rice milk, now people can see what we believe. Somebody walking past can say, "Hey, I can see that you're healthy, so am I." You just attracted an opportunity or a referral or a friend simply by saying and doing the things that you believe. And the best part is it's scalable. As soon as I said the why, you knew exactly which products we were going to buy. This means the more you can articulate your why, the more others will know what you stand for and will be able to help you make the right decisions. From now on, you will work to ensure everything you do is a good fit. If you do too many things that aren't a good fit, you'll feel uncomfortable and people will feel that you're being inauthentic. On the other hand, when you start with why, your ability to stand out, find support, and work to all your natural strengths will flourish. With practice, you will learn to trust your why. You will eventually start to see your job and the things you do as ways to breathe life into your cause. And the better you get at it, the more you will feel that your life and everything you do has purpose. The best way to implement your why is to work at it slowly. You don't have to do all the tips we suggest. What is important is that you pick up to 3 and commit to practicing and using them now.
Part of Sinek's point, one of his bigger points that he's really making here, is the kind of central place that you really need to start is what we often refer to in K-12 education as your kind of mission. Like, what is it that the school is trying to do, right? So starting with your why. That's the thing that you need to hold and keep central. And we then subsequently believe that you can start getting more concrete, right? Identifying your goal, what's your strategy, and what are your metrics. And I'm going to walk through those pretty briefly before we move into our next set of activities. So starting with that why, that mission, we kind of get to the goal, right? One of the oft-used structures in thinking about goals is SMART goals. And the reason that we offer this as a refresher for probably many of you that know how to construct SMART goals is that they are very concrete, right? It's one thing to say, we want all students in this school to learn. That's great. That does not help teachers or grade levels to know what is it that their mission is. How do they fit within the bigger machinery of the school itself? As opposed to saying, by the end of this academic year, we want to see all students grow at least 1/2 grade level in English language arts. Like, that's pretty specific. It's time bound. You can measure it over the course of the year. It's pretty reasonable relative to the school that you're discussing, and it's attainable for the school itself. So coming up with those goals that come out of your why and why you as a set of adults are working together in that school is really important in helping you to move to the next stage, which is really thinking about this theory of action. So if you have this goal in mind, a theory of action at its most simple basically says, if we do X, then we might accomplish Y. It's your hypothesis. It is a working hypothesis that if you want to accomplish something, the SMART goal that I just articulated, you believe that there's a set of actions or strategies that are actually going to help you attain it. And the more clear that you get about that with yourself and with your leadership and other teachers in your schools and others that are supporting those kids, the more likely, A, that you're going to see people acting towards that goal, and B, that they are going to have something to say that actually could be really profound if and when you reach that goal, right? So in part, setting the goal is important, but the more important part is getting people engaged in where you want to go as a school. Because down the line, inevitably, you're not going to meet that goal. And you're going to have a conversation about what happened. Where did we meet pieces of our goal? Where did we fall short? And how do we rethink the work that we do that? And the individuals that are best oriented to engage in that conversation are the people that are directly doing the work with kids. They have some of the most relevant and important information in helping you as a leader in your school to understand how to reach that goal. So we would suggest getting through the why and the goal, that you then come up with these statements, right? And so when you think about if we do X, identifying those actions or tasks, keep it really simple, name a single action or strategy aligned to the outcome, and it's going to accomplish Y, right? And this outcome could be that SMART goal that I mentioned before. So in thinking about that theory of action, the last piece of this puzzle is to think about the metrics that you're going to measure over time. So here in the state of Maryland, you have summative assessments that you provide to a certain subset of your students every single year. You get the results of those assessments subsequent to that test, but they often come really late. So one of the things I just want to distinguish here is between those summative set of assessments, right, that happen at the end of the school year, and a more formative or interim set of measures. So in each of your schools, your teachers are doing something with their kids on an ongoing basis. They are offering dipsticks, if you will, things that you could basically look at on a weekly or monthly basis to understand, are students progressing at the pace that we expected relative to our goal over the course of the year. And this is what I was saying before about figuring out how you structure the time with adults together, that this, particularly in a formative fashion, is a great way to do it. that when you have a grade level together, or if you have a subject matter group of teachers that are together, what they might be discussing is a set of metrics that are aligned to an outcome at the end of the year. Improvements on an ELA test, improvements on a math test, another assessment that you offer to those students aligned to your goals. So thinking about those metrics in a way that's not just summative in nature, but what are the more routine checks that you're creating across the course of the year are really important. And again, going back to thinking about how they spend their time, that they're spending their time not only with each other, but how they're spending it with adults, is something structurally that you may have to address as a leadership team. You may have to reorganize the way students are in class and getting a certain set of instructional minutes in order to achieve an ability for teachers to come together to talk about these results on a monthly basis or a bi-weekly basis. So the last word I want to offer is very specific to budgeting, right? So this last piece was really about how you're orienting the thinking of the school, both for yourself and for other leaders and teachers in your school, and how you're creating a structure that allows for the justification of the way that you're budgeting. So at your schools, and we've got some very different circumstances in the room, some folks here from Baltimore City, others from Prince George's, totally recognize that those school systems budget and account for dollars and create autonomies very differently, and happy to talk about each of those circumstances offline, but we want to give you a couple of general guideposts in thinking about those different resources. So first and foremost, if we were just to break it up into people and then non-people. So when we think about positions or the number of FTE that are available to school, think about what their responsibilities are. Consider where they are dedicated to their priorities. Now for classroom teachers, this isn't going to be as necessary because their responsibility is teaching a certain set of kiddos in that room, doing it for a certain set of minutes towards a set of standards on a day-to-day basis, right? That's pretty routine. And there's probably a portion of their time that is dedicated to planning and working with other grade level teachers potentially. So thinking about how you structure that time. But then you might also think about who are the individuals and adults outside of the classroom that are supporting their work or supporting students. So positions like an instructional coach come to mind. Positions like if you have a nurse or a social worker or a counselor in your school. If you have an assistant principal, that's a super high leverage position. In particular, because they can help to kind of push in on priorities that you as a principal may not be able to handle on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I can remember talking with principals and on a daily basis, the number of parents that were like streaming through their office, right, almost becomes a bit of a burden, right? So having an assistant principal, they might be able to help with that specific issue or to deal with a fire drill so that you as a leader can focus on other things seems really important. And the other thing that I'll say about this, particularly when you think about people in the building, is that as leaders in your school, where you show up and what you do is going to tell people a lot. So if you are in classrooms looking at instruction, offering some informal feedback to teachers aligned to a set of goals, and you're doing that on a very consistent basis, and you're saying, hey, every Tuesday and Thursday, 3 hours within the morning, that's where I am. I am in classrooms, observing, helping, and supporting teachers. That is going to send a message and a signal. Right back to Sinek's point about when you own it and believe it, other people start gravitating towards it. So I would think about this bucket of work not only in the other adults that are in your schools, but also about how you're spending your time. And then the last piece is around your other non-labor resources to allocate program priorities. So a couple things specific to schools that might be really important here. If there's a new type of skill or learning that you want your school to know about, you may have to go get some outside support, either from the school district or from an outside consulting group. And what I would offer is think about that as few and far between. Because when you're bringing an outside resource, either from the district office or from the state or from another nonprofit agency into your school, They don't know your culture. You know your culture. And it will take some time if they're going to be working with your teachers to teach them something new, to think about how to integrate that information and integrate that new learning into your environment. So I would avoid the kind of wildflowers idea, right? Let 1,000 flowers bloom in your school site, and think about a couple set of non-labor resources that are going to be crucial to helping you advance what your community sees as important for school improvement. And think about that partnership in a way that stretches beyond a year, if appropriate, to create that opportunity for implementation to really take hold. And the last thing I'll mention before I turn it over to my colleague, Amy Evan, is actually about pencils and paper, which would seem like a very simple thing. But the amount of disruption that not having pencils and paper might cause, I cannot emphasize enough. And I can remember there being kind of weeks on end when I was working in school districts where teachers were saying in the middle of the budget crisis in California, we don't have pencils and we don't have paper. And it wasn't necessarily about the resource, it was about where their mind was. Because where we needed them to be focused on was kids and how they were thinking about engaging them and learning with them. And you got to attend to those basic needs. You got to hit those foundational points, check those boxes before you can get to deeper conversations with those adults. So in thinking about those non-labor resources, considering checking those basic boxes are really important. So with that, I'm going to turn it over actually to Carol, and we'll keep going from there.